Hi, hello everybody, and welcome back to another amazing episode of Humans of Campus Housing. My name is Leo, and I'm here with my amazing co-host, Ben Wicker. Hey Ben, how's it going?
Doing well, thanks, Leo. How are you?
Pretty good. I just really want to do a quick shout out and say congratulations, Ben. He was the president of CHO, so we just wrapped up CHO like was it like 2 weeks ago, and it went
Yep.
amazing. How are you
Yes.
doing with all of that, Ben?
Oh, it was great. It was a wonderful experience. I was able to just really try and be observant and mindful of everything that was going on. That's the advice that everybody was giving me. All the other past presidents are like, try to take some time to soak it all in. I was very busy during the entire time. I was thankful that my wife was able to come with me and help me for the entire week. And then my parents brought my kids up, and they were able to be there on Friday as we closed out the conference and as I gave my outgoing remarks and everything. So it was really special and awesome, and I'm really grateful that I got to do it, and I'm looking forward to this year as past president.
That's amazing. Well, congratulations on that, Ben. It was an
I
amazing
appreciate it.
experience to be there.
Thank you.
We do have an amazing guest today. His name is Ben Pearlman, and he is the Assistant Vice President of Student Engagement at St. Louis University. Hey, Ben Pearlman, how's it going?
It's going great. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you. So, just to avoid confusion, because we do have two Bens, I will refer to you as Ben P, and I'll have my co-host as Ben W. It's going to be a little bit weird because I never refer to him as anything other than Ben, just Ben. So, hopefully, I don't mess this up.
You're good.
We'll make it work.
So I did want to start this episode off by asking a little bit more of going from like the past and then moving forward. My first question is I wanted to ask, how has housing been impacted during and after COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of different student affairs roles were heavily impacted in COVID, but I think, the housing and residence life teams took the biggest brunt of the stay-at-home, operating procedures and the community safety things, and it's left a lasting mark on, I think, on the housing industry, right? I think while we expect a certain amount historically of attrition of like frontline housing staff members to other student affairs practice areas, and then sometimes, frankly, out leaving the profession, I think we're seeing much higher rates of folks leaving the profession in general, and because a lot of sort of the college students from that generation didn't really get a full residential experience, it's kind of interrupted the pipeline, I think, in some ways, to get new graduate students, new professionals in the door to take on some of these roles.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I saw a really interesting chart yesterday. I don't remember exactly where it was at, but it was talking about housing staffing levels within our field and the demarcation, because I think yesterday was the 5-year anniversary since the COVID pandemic was announced. And so it showed like that, it had that line right there, right, of when everything started. And it showed like resignations from the field. And there was a huge dip when it first started because people were like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And they were staying at home, they were holding on to everything. But then within like a year, there was a huge jump way above where typical levels were of people starting to resign their positions. And Ben P's actually absolutely right. I think that students, we weren't able to express with them or convince them, or they weren't able to see the value in positions like being an RA or a desk assistant or student housing positions. And so it has taken, a long time, several years, for us to get back up to those pre-COVID numbers of people applying for RA positions, then matriculating to graduate positions. And some of that still hasn't completely played out yet. So we're in the midst of it now, but I think that the students' positions were the first ones that we were waiting to kind of rebound. And most of the folks that I've talked to in housing are kind of back to those pre-COVID numbers of, well above where they want to be for the number of applications for the number of positions that they have available.
I think that correct me if I'm wrong, but has that impacted how you hire online versus in person since the whole COVID pandemic happened?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know for as much for students. I think, by the way, that this has been the first sort of like same numbers for us as well in terms of student employment for pre-COVID numbers. But for I think for graduate students and professional staff, it's a lot of it has gone virtual. Some of that's super convenient in terms of I am certainly the generation of like placement exchange, which is you probably like it used to be that like at NASPA or at ACPA, these big student affairs conferences, you'd go to this ballroom, convention center room that's totally separate from the conference, and it was just like 6 foot tables after 6 foot tables after 6 foot tables of institutions interviewing for entry level positions mostly, and it was like a cattle call. You would do 5, 6, 7 interviews in a day over 3 or 4 days as like your first round, hoping that you get an invite to campus from that experience. Now it's virtual. I think it has some knock-on effects of like how our professional associations run financially, because I was a large fundraiser for the association, but it's a little bit easier to schedule. It's a little bit less. I think it typically does the candidates more service to not have the fatigue of all that, to do it like back to back to back to back to back. So you get a little bit better responses when you're asking questions. But for me at least, I don't know how Ben W does it, but like for now, we're still doing in person for like finalist positions. Yeah. And for the RA roles, we've gone back to fully in person. And this is the first year that it's been where I think a lot of places, if you have a really good residential program and you're doing really well, your RA application rate is like more than double how many spots you have to fill. Sure. And that's what we want it to be. And this is the first year that we've been back to that kind of level.
Is that your experience, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. It's really interesting because in a previous life, when I was in a dissertation or it was in a doctoral program, my dissertation was looking at the experience of entry-level housing staff navigating that job search process, right? Which was you do a phone interview usually with somebody, and then they would invite you to campus for a final interview where you would go through this whole kind of gauntlet of experiences with panel interviews and presentations maybe, and meals and campus tours and all that. And then you would eventually, hopefully at some point, get an offer to come and work. And yeah, COVID completely turned that on its head. I think, I think if you talk to folks who have been doing this for as long as we have, we will argue the positives and negatives of it. I do think that it makes it a bit more equitable and it makes it a bit more accessible. But I also think that there's a different level of commitment from the candidates to the process, right? And they're not as invested, I don't think, either in the process or, in my opinion, the final job, because they haven't necessarily been personally invested in that way, from time, from travel, from funds, and all that. But I think it does really allow them to be a bit more selective and a bit more discerning about where they do want to apply.
So you mentioned the hiring within the student grads. How do senior professionals hire within that pool now?
I think it's changing. I think on the graduate level, we're seeing a lot of, I think traditionally we targeted particularly for live-in residence life positions, targeted folks pursuing, masters in student affairs administration or student personnel or similar programs. As I understand it, limited understanding or connection, some of those programs are really shrinking. And we have a great program on our campus, but we have more graduate assistantships than there are students every year. And so we've had to expand our sort of expectations or sort of our qualifications. We're blessed at SLU to have great programs in very similar, adjacent, I would say, helping professions, things like social work, public health education, where we attract some really great candidates who have that sort of focus on helping skills and counseling skills that we want in those roles. I do know that a lot of my colleagues who don't necessarily have access to programs like graduate students and programs like that are struggling more than we are at SLU. And sometimes I think the other strategy is growing your own talent in the sense that folks are targeting high performing RAs from their campus who happen to be continuing on to graduate school in anything, in applied math, nobody, whatever it is. But since they've already been a strong performing RA, folks have the skill set, and they recruit them, sometimes beg them, to be a graduate hall coordinator and to stay on. And that's more, that's just a more common thing than it was 10 years ago, I think, by far.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I know that, I'm hearing more and more of institutions either cutting down or completely eliminating graduate level positions and going after individuals who have experience as resident assistant, desk assistants, hall counsel, whatever it might be, and hiring them with bachelor's degrees to maybe not have as wide of a scope of supervision or responsibility as they did, again, when we were coming up through it, because Ben P was actually absolutely right that, we were trying to find individuals with higher ed master's degrees, and that was where the funnel was feeding through, right? And now I think it's interesting because I think a part of that in trying to find individuals who maybe were an RA for 2 or 3 years or has that housing background and bringing them into an entry level hall supervisor or hall director type position, part of that recruitment can then be like, hey, at least I know, where I'm at in other similar institutions, you work here for 6 months and then you have tuition benefits, right? Where you don't have to pay to earn a master's degree. And we're giving you a full-time paycheck. We're paying for your housing. We're probably providing some meal stipend and stuff like that. So they're getting housing for free, they're getting paid, and they're getting a degree of their choice for free, right? And so it's becoming a little bit of it's similar but a little bit different recruitment strategy with individuals. I don't know that that will necessarily continue on. Like, I think if they were going to want to have mid-level or upper mid-level positions, they're going to have to show that they have some competency within student affairs and understand that theory, how to navigate the field and things like that. And so, pursuing a master's degree either at an institution within your system or that has some sort of reciprocity with tuition exchange or even certification to show that you have competency within certain areas are going to be some new routes that we're going to be utilizing to create mid and upper mid-level managers in the next 5 to 10 years. So it is different, and I do think that the higher ed programs are struggling a little bit, and I think that that's a whole other half a day of conversation about why that is, right? Like,
no, it's another episode.
It really is. I mean, and it would be really interesting to talk to some faculty about, how they perceive it, because I having done that, I know that their perception of what the issues are, quote unquote, are very different than ours as practitioners. So it's definitely a conversation for another time.
Yeah, I think I think in our industry we've always thought of that graduate assistant role as sort of an apprenticeship, and I think we're also kind of looking at some of those bachelor positions and how can we shape a position, maybe change the ratio of student to staff to be a little bit smaller, things like that, to make that maybe a fit that works, and still kind of treating it like an apprenticeship, but just as a full-time apprenticeship, right? To say to somebody, typically someone who's had a great collegiate experience in student affairs, typically in residence life, if you're thinking about this, come work full time doing this very manageable job based on the ratio of RAs and residents and stuff. And if you're privileged as both of our institutions are, we have a higher program. If you want to make this a permanent, career, as permanent as any career can be, we'll support you in going back, while you're working full time to get your master's degree in an economical situation that is very advantageous, right? More advantageous than being a graduate assistant even, right?
Yep.
The time element might be slightly longer, I will say,
Yep.
right? But there's that piece. The other strategy that we're using, particularly for mid-year openings, which we just try to avoid broadly, but happen, and we just had this happen this year, is we start a little bit early, right? We've actually targeted one of our newest staff, live-in frontline coordinator staff, is finishing their master's this semester. We recruited them out of their higher ed program at another school while they were still in a grad assistant. Said, hey, do you just want to start early, and we'll help you. We'll manage your school thing. It happened to be that their school offered virtual courses, and they were already in virtual courses, and so we said, hey, we'll make time. We'll work around your class schedule. Come finish up your master's here and work full time here. And you can get started. And we were able to recruit them here, right? So some of those things, there are a few higher programs that are virtual or that offer virtual classes where, I'm thinking about how can we sort of cherry pick those candidates, particularly in mid-year, which you kind of get a head start on candidacy. But the role is something that we need to think about, because I think there are some longtime veterans of housing, right, and residence life areas who expect everyone to have a master's degree, who expect a certain ratio, and that if you really want to be fully staffed, you got to think outside the box a little bit at this point, I think.
So Ben P, you mentioned veterans in these roles. I did want to ask, how do these veteran professionals see the younger generations of professionals working in campus housing once they're hired?
I'll let Ben W go first on that one.
Yeah, I really think it depends on who you talk to, and to some extent, kind of their lineage coming through the field too. And it's such a complicated question, Leo, because I think that on a fundamental level, they know that their tried and true method is to recruit those people who have master's degrees to come in and work full time, to then work with graduate assistants and supervise them to train the next generation in, right? And so all these things that we've been talking about today have really disrupted that traditional process. And so I think what the proof is kind of in the pudding for some of these veteran folks in showing them that these new ideas can work, right? And so, by successfully recruiting somebody who was a 3-year RA, and then, them coming in and 6 months, a year into their position, they start taking a master's courses. And like Ben P said, it might take them a little bit longer. So now if they want to finish that degree, I've actually got them longer now than maybe somebody who I have recruited who's already finished that master's degree. And so there's some continuity there. And then, once they finish their master's degree, they have a decision to make, right? I'm okay. I've never been a person who has set those limits. There are some of the kind of older generation folks who are like, no, the most you can be here is 5 years, or the most you can be here is 3 years, or whatever. Then you need to go. And they do it altruistically to say, okay, you need to go and pursue these other opportunities for yourself. I've always been of the opinion that as long as the relationship is reciprocal, right? As long as I'm still getting good work out of you, as long as you're still feeling valued and appreciative of what we're providing for you, then I'm okay with you staying as long as you want to. Now, if the work starts to slack off, that's a different conversation. If the attitude starts to change, that's a different conversation. But I think it's a matter of really demonstrating that these new ideas can work.
I think flipping the script a little bit and thinking about not how the generation's coming in, but what's going on with the generation that might be struggling with these new folks, right? Which is the change is hard. I think that's what Ben W is saying, right? Is that accepting that parameters have changed, and sometimes I think veterans, I don't even like calling myself a veteran, but folks with a fair bit of experience, right? They'll think about all the things that are not working for them from a staffing perspective and blame it on generational issues. I do think there's something to be said about coming out of the pandemic, but I don't think it's a generational thing, right? I think we all have people in our lives, in our sphere of work, with 10, 20, 30 years of experience who had real sort of existential crises or reprioritizations that changed their perception of work, changed their goals, sometimes changed their attitudes, and because it was a crisis, right? And I don't think that's about people aged 20 to 25 or 25 to 30. I think it affects everyone. It maybe affects everybody differently, right? But being so rigidity, I don't think is going to continue to be. I mean, if this last 6 months in higher education has been any indication, rigidity in thought related to some of these issues isn't going to be super successful moving forward, right? We have to stay aerodynamic and thoughtful about what we're doing, and not change for change's sake, right? Change in a principled, mission-driven way, but to evolve, I think, in some ways.
Yeah, I think so. Ben, what do you think about that? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and I do. I think it is a matter of prioritization, right? Everybody really had to take a hard look in the mirror about what their values were and why they were doing the work that they were doing. When you talk about the Great Resignation, I think that really kind of led to things. There's also the perspective of just the amount of information people were being offered and seeing that, oh, well, my former colleague is now doing this and seems to be very happy and this, that, and the other. And so people had to reconcile that, right? So it really was a perception thing as well. And I've seen people who have stepped out because they were in toxic or just situations where they were unwell, and now they've maybe made their way back, right? And so I think people are more willing to take that risk now of separating for things, because those kind of old school thoughts about how you have to navigate in this field, they're not thrown out the window, but they're kind of a new mix of things now with how we approach that work. So it's been really interesting to watch. It's very hard to manage from our perspective because we don't really have the systems that are in place for that. And there are other factors that influence how we recruit, how we're able to hire, so on and so forth, that can make it more difficult for us. But for the most part, I do think there is a change. I think there's also there is a conversation going on around this multi-generational workplace that we're in and how we appreciate and recognize the different values that each generation brings in. And again, a whole other podcast, a whole other line of discussion there. But, we're talking about 5 different generations in a workplace, which is astronomical. And there's some marked differences with how we all approach workplace and work-life integration as well. So it's, still kind of TBD, and we're all still, there's a lot of writing going on about that. There's a lot of discussion happening around that. And it's kind of interesting to be a part of right now.
I mean, I will say that's one of the things that gives me hope is that I'm starting to see like Ben W. And I just saw it on LinkedIn when you asked me about my profile. I saw that I have some experience in college unions as well, and a cherished colleague who left the profession. Much like housing, a lot of us have these transferable skills. That's part of the reason it's so easy to make a transition. They just announced that they came back, right? And that's happening more and more and more. And so I think folks do remember the values of this profession. And they might have left because of burnout. They might have left because of a toxic situation. But I hope that we get more people coming back.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I think people are more. They are definitely taking more risks now more than ever. But it's really important to recognize the values that come with working in this industry, which is really amazing. And of course, we could keep talking about this for what seems like hours on end, but unfortunately, we are kind of out of time already. But I do want to go ahead and ask Ben P, where can people find you? And is there anything that you probably want to plug? Anything that people might want to take from this to research a little bit more?
I'm happy to connect with folks on LinkedIn. I do happen to have a director of residence life position open coming up. Happy to talk with folks about that. That was not the case in the planning for this, but I would love to talk to folks about being the next director of residence life. And if you want to learn about sort of the transformational impact of Jesuit education, we're a great place to do it. But LinkedIn's the best place to find me, and happy to talk more about this.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, Ben W., take it away.
Yeah. So we thank you all for tuning into the Humans of Campus Housing podcast today. It's always our hope that our conversation has helped you in some way, connected to your personal or professional experiences, or that it inspires you to take this back and continue or further the discussion. If there's any topics you would like to hear us discuss, please reach out and let us know. And of course, we hope that you will like, share, and subscribe to Humans of Campus Housing podcast. In this crazy world, please take care of yourself out there. Look after your students, care for your people, and most importantly, take care of yourself and find ways daily to refill your cup. A special thanks again to Ben Pearlman at St. Louis University for being here today and sharing your expertise, and for you all taking time for us. For Leo and everyone associated with Humans of Campus Housing, thanks for joining us.